bringing people together throughout the globe to kind of share knowledge and expertise. I'm mindful that what I'm going to talk about is kind of quite Scotland centric, so I'll try and internationalize it as best as I can to kind of make sense. I'm sure Dee and Kaylee, from a UK perspective, will kind of recognise a lot of what I'm talking about. I suppose at the outset, I'll kind of run through what I'm going to talk about. I think I've got 45 minutes. Is that right, Kaylee? Yeah, I'll be as brief as I can whilst kind of introducing some topics to you. So I'll talk about what we do as an organisation. Then I'll move on to some approaches or some work that's been done in Scotland. Admittedly, after a lot of pressure by organisations like IFAM to move in towards a cash-first approach in Scotland. So the Scottish Government are doing some work around that. Scottish Government are also legislating to become a good food nation, and I'll kind of explain what that is. And then if we have time, I can maybe touch on Glasgow's own food plan. So yeah, I'll kind of set that scene. And for those of you not familiar with sort of how politics and government works in the UK, is that there are devolved parliaments and devolved legislatures in the UK and Wales and Scotland and about to restart in Northern Ireland. And I suppose the easiest way to describe it is like a sort of federal level and a state level. In Scotland, the Scottish Government are able to legislate on specific matters which are called devolved issues. But for some issues such as defence, for example, that is a reserved matter. So only the UK government can kind of legislate and do things in the area of defence, for example. But in Scotland, we have some powers over some social security and welfare benefits and payments that we run our health service and responsible for running that. So yeah, the issues I'm going to be talking about are devolved issues, and maybe Dee and Kaylee can kind of talk to the contrast. In England, at least, different approaches. So yeah, please just feel free to kind of jump in at any point, and I'll be kind of just sharing some information. And yeah, I'm happy to take questions at any point. So yeah, I'm the managing director of the Courtyard Pantry Enterprise. It's a relatively new charity that was established in 2022, whose purpose is to reduce the effects of poverty in Glasgow, specifically using food as a vehicle for change. So we achieve this firstly through the provision of good quality food at low cost, and also widening access to cost of living support services to the local community. And secondly, we also try to lift people out of poverty by creating well-paid, secure jobs and training opportunities at our food enterprises. So we operate a pantry hub, which is based in the northwest of Glasgow, which distributes the good quality food I mentioned. And we also provide additional support in terms of cost of living support services to our members. On the enterprise side, we run a catering enterprise and a community cafe. Last year, we served over 10,000 meals to the local community and distributed around 40 tonnes of food, which is predominantly surplus food, to over 1,500 members. We won an award at the end of 2022 as the Community Team of the Year by the local newspaper. And we were recently selected as one of the 100 change makers by the publication Big Issue. Big Issue is a nationwide magazine which supports people that are homeless or at risk of homeless by providing them an income. They basically sell the magazine, and they get to keep the profit. We are guided in our efforts and through our community wealth building principles, which is to create a more equitable, community-based economy through inclusive economic development. We regard our model as innovative and sustainable and looks to address the root causes of poverty and to help ease the trauma caused by economic activity and lack of access to good quality food for local people and their families in Glasgow. We, the trustees and management, have created a set of values which reflect the type of organisation we want to be and which are grounded as an inclusive human rights-based approach. So we're committed to fair work, which is a framework developed by the Scottish Government, which looks to create a workplace that offers an effective voice, opportunity, security, fulfilment and respect to both employers and employees. We believe in dignity. We believe that everyone deserves to live and work in a dignified and respectful environment. We aim to operate at the highest ethical standards to do the right thing, even if no one is watching. We are collaborative. We believe that collaborative and cooperative communications with our customers, partners, and community builds consensus and produces impactful outcomes. We're also committed to being sustainable, to make a positive contribution to the development of social, economic, environmental health of our communities. As I aforementioned, we're a fair work employer, which is a framework adapted by the Scottish Government to encourage organisations to create fairer and more inclusive workplaces. So this is one of the things I was describing, which is what has devolved and what is retained. The UK government retain all employment law legislation, so Scottish Government can only adopt frameworks. So they have published a framework around fair work, and we are a fair work employer. We also are an accredited living wage employer. So the living wage in the UK is basically set independently, and it's basically set at a level which is calculated to ensure that somebody earning that level would be able to afford all of the essentials. It's different from what's referred to as the minimum wage, which is set by the government. This is a voluntary wage, which is calculated separately. And typically, living wages tend to be higher than minimum wages. So we are a living wage employer, and our employees earn a minimum of £12 per hour. I don't have the calculations in front of me of what that equates to dollars. But yeah, £12 per hour is our minimum. So why do we do what we do? So we work predominantly, our pantry is located in an area called Postle Park, in an area of Glasgow. In 2011, so 12 years ago, it was ranked the most deprived area in the whole of the United Kingdom, and it consistently ranks in the top 5 most deprived areas according to the Scottish Index on Multiple Deprivation, which is it's a research tool which calculates how deprived an area is, and that doesn't necessarily mean just through poverty, but it can also be like lack of access to food, lack of transportation links, etc. In this part of Glasgow, only 47% of people are in employment, which is 17% less than the Glasgow average, and approximately 46% of children live in poverty, and it also has the lowest female life expectancy in Glasgow. When we set up the Pantry Hub, we understood that food insecurity was a major public health concern in this area, and 12% of the population experienced some form of food insecurity, which is the highest in Scotland. Social isolation is a problem as well, recording higher than average levels of social isolation compared to the rest of the city and Scotland more broadly. And bear in mind, all of this research was carried out before the effects of COVID and lockdown were felt, before the global inflation crisis, which has disproportionately affected those on low income and basically made everything a lot worse. So our ambition for our charity is to help to tackle these endemic issues by generating wealth and opportunity for local people through our food enterprises, and then at the same time ensuring that people get access to essential goods and services at our pantry hub to maintain a dignified standard of living. So that's kind of like an overview of what we do. So I'll kind of pause there to answer any questions.
Could you say again the name of the neighborhood?
It's an area called Postle Park. So I've got some notes, Jan, that I've put together for this, which I'm happy to share, which has all the spellings, which is probably a lot to do with my pronunciation.
But I'm glad I asked. I heard Possum
Possum
Park.
It'd be cool if it was called Possum Park. I'd like to live there, but yeah, it's called Postle Park. POSSILPARK.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, any questions or any thoughts?
It's Graham here. I'm wondering, did you have any? Is there any input from Nourish Scotland, Pete Ritchie, and that group? Because I was in Glasgow in 2014 when this whole right to food sort of matter was being discussed, etc. I'm a little bit familiar with Glasgow, and as a student way back, I worked in the Gorbals, so I kind of know a little bit about what you're dealing with. But I'm interested in the Nourish Scotland role.
Sure.
Whether you work with them.
So Nourish Scotland were involved in creating a dignity and practice principles or dignity and practice framework, which was designed to basically give people experiencing food insecurity input and direction into designing how it's implemented in their community. And our pantry uses that principle. So we use that framework to inform our work. So Nourish Scotland aren't directly involved in our work, but our work is informed by Nourish Scotland's work in this area. And we're also part of a wider network of food pantries called the Scottish Pantry Network, which, as the name suggests, is a sort of Scotland-wide network of pantries that all operate independently, but are all trying to do the same things in their community.
And how are you funded? What is your
with difficulty, Graham? So it'll probably there is no direct funding for the types of project that we have. So like the Pantry Hub, for example, even though we are feeding and supporting the citizens of Glasgow, Glasgow City Council don't provide any direct funding for a project. And the Scottish Government, because we're relatively new, we missed out on the latest round of Scottish Government funding. It's called the ICF, which is Investment in Communities Fund. Right. So for the majority of our non-profit part of the charity, that we're relying on the generosity of philanthropists, trusts, foundations to fund our work.
Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of supports you're getting from your municipal government? Doesn't sound like you're getting any money, but anything else that they're able to support you in?
I think like the council are very, very supportive. We have a great relationship with Glasgow City Council. They gave us a small bit of money to help to fund some of our services. But there's really no support beyond that. Like, I think that they like what we do, and like there's certain parts of the local council that are really supportive and encouraging, but it doesn't really go beyond that. I think like within the sort of let's call it the sort of fiscal environment in the UK and at sort of municipal level, like budgets have been slashed and repeatedly slashed for over a decade. So with inflation, budgets are not going as far, and the local and national governments are having to make some very, very difficult decisions. And I would say, unlike the United States and Canada, which I know of, that food pantries are a recent phenomenon. Like as a response, like food banks are like first appeared on any scale about 10, 15 years ago in the UK. Food pantries are kind of, let's say, the evolution, the next step from it. So I don't think sort of local government and national government have really appreciated or understood the impact that we're making, and that's partly to do with us, like in terms of telling story. But it's not, we're not considered part of the sort of public health response to food insecurity and poverty, which we may turn into. But at the moment, like we're not considered a kind of critical service. And at the moment, the governments are having to make really difficult decisions around what critical services they can fund.
Yeah, but do you have any kind of is there any kind of municipal food strategy that embraces the kind of rights-based work that you're doing?
So I can get into that. I can get into that because like there's two strategies that we can refer to, which is the Good Food Nation Bill, which is just been enshrined into law in Scotland, and also Glasgow City Council, well, Glasgow's 10-year food plan, which I can talk about in some detail, which will give you a kind of an overview of I suppose, like a strategy perspective. So let me go on to the cash first approach, and then I can chat about the Good Food Nation. Would that be useful? And then I can open it back up. So yeah, the Scottish government, after a lot of pressure from organisations like IFAN and other organisations in Scotland, enshrined into law, or pardon me, they've developed a strategy called the cash first approach. And the strategy was published on the 5th of June of last year, so in the summer of last year, which is setting out a strategy over the next 3 years to ending the need for food banks in Scotland. So the Scottish government, and this is sort of quoting verbatim from their document, that they're saying that they're setting out a human rights approach to tackling food insecurity, and outlining 9 actions which they will take over the next 3 years to improve the response to financial hardship and to start to reduce the need for emergency food parcels. So the Scottish government defined the cash first approach as any activity which maximises income and make household budgets go further, and being able to access essential goods with dignities and choice. So this pantry hub, by definition, is a key cash first approach, because our members are able to use the pantry. Our approach is informed with the dignity and practice principles, and also members are able to choose what they need rather than just being given a bag or told what to take. So I can give you 2 examples of a cash first approach of which the Scottish government are already following. So in Scotland, there is a Scottish child payment. So from April of this year, each eligible child will be given £26.70 per child per week. And it's expected that 50,000 children will be lifted out of poverty just by this action. To be eligible, you have to live in Scotland. You or your partner need to be receiving certain benefits. And so there's some stipulations, but basically if you're eligible for each child that you have, you'll be able to get £26.70 per week. Now, there's another cash first approach as well, which is called Best Start Foods. which is a prepaid card that you can use to buy foods in store and online. So you're eligible if you receive certain benefits, but also if you're eligible, you can apply anytime from when you're pregnant up to when your child turns 3. So you get £19.80 every 4 weeks during your pregnancy. You get £39.60 every 4 weeks from your child being born up until they're 1 year old. And then you get £19.80 every 4 weeks when your child is aged between 1 and 3 years old. So this is basically specifically for like fruit and vegetables that the Scottish government will give you cash to purchase those. And the cash first approach is also taking a long-term approach to food insecurity. So basically, what they're trying to do with this cash first approach is to implement a range of preventative actions that will basically help people improve their incomes, reduce costs, and minimize the need to access food banks. So they talk about promoting fair work, so ensuring that there's a minimum income guarantee, enhanced public sector pay, anti-racism employment strategy, real living wage, and then they also look at strengthening social security, so that would be referred to as welfare. So again, you know, Best Start grants, Best Start foods, Scottish Child Payment, Adult Disability Payment, Child Disability Payment, and then they also have a strategy for reducing the cost of living. So looking to roll out to eligible people, free bus travel, early learning and childcare, free school clothing, free school meals, affordable homes, etc. So that's the Scottish government. That is this, in a nutshell, what their cash first approach is. So that launched last year, and there's going to be a sort of 3-year strategy for basically getting more money into more people's pockets. And I think, I mean, I kind of follow US politics quite closely, and I think what basically in recent child poverty stats were published in the UK, and child poverty is going up in England and going up in Wales, but it's staying flat in Scotland. And the reason it's staying flat in Scotland is because of this child payment. Now, I know that during the sort of pandemic, the crisis, like Social Security and a lot of measures were implemented by the Biden administration, which drastically and dramatically cut child poverty, which was then reversed by, or undone by, and then now child poverty has gone back the other way. So I think Scottish government are really bought into giving more cash to people, and these are some of the ways in which they're going to do that. So I can pause just now, or I can kind of get right into the Good Food Nation bill and this talk about the Glasgow Food Plan, and I can answer questions at the end, or I can pause just now to talk specifically about the cash first approach. I'll keep on going.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And apologies if I do sound like a member of the Scottish government here. Like I am remote from the policy making. So, and at the moment, a lot of these strategies are just starting. So I take the Scottish government's proposals in good faith that they'll try to do what they're setting out to do. So Scotland, the Scottish government are committed to Scotland becoming a good food nation. So by 2025, the Scottish government are Scottish government are implementing policies to turn Scotland into a good food nation, where people from every walk of life take pride and pleasure in and benefit from the food they produce, cook, buy, serve, and eat each day. So this was enshrined in law in June of 2022. And again, they're giving themselves a 3-year time horizon. So they've set out 6 outcomes for the Good Food Nation. So outcome 1, that everybody in Scotland eats well with reliable access to safe, nutritious, affordable, sustainable, and age and culturally appropriate food. Scotland's food system is sustainable and contributes to a flourishing natural environment. It supports our net zero ambitions and plays an important role in maintaining and improving animal welfare and restoring and regenerating biodiversity. Outcome 3, Scotland's food system encourages a physically and mentally healthy population, leading to a reduction in diet-related conditions. Outcome 4, our food and drink sector is prosperous, diverse, innovative, and vital to national and local economic and social well-being. It is key to making Scotland food secure and food resilient, and creates and sustains jobs and businesses underpinned by fair work standards. Outcome 5, Scotland has a thriving food culture with a population who are interested in and educated about good and sustainable food. And then outcome 6, Scotland has a global reputation for high quality food that we want to continue to grow. Decisions we make in Scotland contribute positively to local and global food systems transformation. We learn and share best practice internationally. So I do know that the next stage of this is now out to consultation. So there's a series of events taking place all over Scotland, which I'm hoping to get to. The one in Glasgow is in March, on the 1st of March. And yes, not to be too on the nose, but the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. I sincerely hope that this isn't just not all about vibes and saying the right things and having these aspirations, but not being backed up with concrete actions. So yes, again, I take the Scottish Government's approach in good faith, but I would like to see what this means in practice. So that's the sort of Good Food Nation bill. And then Glasgow City Council, amongst other representatives from the public, private and third sectors, published a food plan in June of 2021. So they've been working on this food plan, and then it was published just as the pandemic started. So it was a little bit of bad timing. However, the Glasgow City Food Plan is a framework to achieve a food system in Glasgow that is fair, resilient and environmentally sustainable, and enables everyone in Glasgow to eat healthy, affordable, culturally appropriate, good food, irrespective of where they live, their income or personal circumstances. So the plan itself has long-term outcomes which they want to deliver, which is to improve access to healthy, affordable food and to reduce food insecurity, increased understanding of the food system, especially with regards to nutrition and sustainability, more opportunities for communities to enjoy cooking and growing together, a thriving local food economy which promotes fair work and principles of sustainability, increased availability of use of seasonal, locally grown and produced food in or close to Glasgow, improved health and well-being as a result of improvements in our food system, more food produced in ways that are good for the environment, reduced food waste, increased redistribution of surplus food, and reduced environmental impact from food waste, and finally, reduced greenhouse gas emissions arising from our food system. So that's the kind of the objectives from the Glasgow Food Plan, and we are on the food economy working group. So we're trying, where possible, to move the dial with regards to Glasgow's food system. And I think, like with the pandemic in particular and lockdown, it kind of threw into sharp focus, I suppose, the fragile nature of our food systems. And the UK imports a lot of its food. Yeah, and you had sort of like Brexit, there's new food checks taking place, which will also potentially push up food prices as well. So yeah, a lot of information. As I say, I've got some notes which I'm happily share. I've got links to the government documents which you can read through at your leisure. And but yeah, that's, I think, on the surface, and particularly compared to England, like, you know, Scottish government are trying to move the dial. They're trying to be progressive and kind of quite bold. However, it needs to work, and I don't know how much firepower or kind of money and time and commitment they're going to throw at it. So we just really need to see how it plays out. So I'm done in half an hour speaking. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Dale. I'm sure there's I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. So who wants to go first?
I have more of a comment than a question. But assuming a comment is welcome, just want to say, I, for one, am really grateful to Scotland for articulating as public policy the need to reduce reliance on food banks and eliminate. I mean, it's, as far as I know, it's the first and I think only government to do so. And in the United States, we had a situation where California and Maine, two states on the opposite ends, both decided to go for universal free school meals statewide. And it totally changed the picture, because the feeling that the states wouldn't or couldn't take on the financial commitment, you know, they did it. And now we have 8 states that have committed to permanent statewide universal, and active campaigns in another 34 states. So, you know, having a government say this is an achievable goal and an appropriate role for government, it does change the conversation. So thank you, Scotland.
Thank you, Jan. Sorry, that's very very kind of you to say. Yeah, yeah. In Scotland, you get, I think up to primary 6, all children can eat for free. They get free school lunches and stuff like that. So, yeah, Scotland is trying. It just depends how much they want to push it, like how much they really want to commit to it, and like enforceability around things like food waste, for example, enforceability around like things that they do have powers to do. I'm really keen for them to use their political will to do so.
So is there much of a social movement pushing them to do this? I mean, it's not as if they will ever do anything without push from the citizenry and people most affected.
Well, yeah, IFAN have been hugely instrumental and at a UK level pushing for a cash first approach, and maybe other like Kaylee and Dee can speak to that. I don't know, Graham, do you live in England? Are you in England? Are you in?
Sorry, you're talking to me?
Yeah, are you in England? Or are you in?
I'm living on Vancouver Island.
Ah, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So
okay.
Kaylee.
But I know England very well. I mean, I was born and raised there. You know. So.
Cool. But you maybe be able to talk to that how IFAN are doing in the UK. Sorry, in England. But yeah, like I think my own personal view, Jan, and this is a purely personal view, is that it's politically more expedient to focus on access to food rather than directly address the structural reasons why food insecurity exists. So it's almost, and again, this is a personal view and it might be completely off, but it's almost like trying to address the structural issues through the back door, I think. So like looking to address food insecurity through Fair Work, through all of these different things, and using food as that vehicle for change. So like in answer to your question regarding the social movement, there's a social movement towards the eradication of poverty for sure. And there's very niche kind of social movements like IFAN that are pushing to end food bank provision for sure. The challenge is obviously the people that are using food banks don't have political capital. It's often those people in, you know, the middle classes or maybe that are politically connected that have that power. So I would say, yeah, there's very niche political pressure or social pressure being applied around food. My own view is that the Scottish government can commit to being a good food nation because that can help people through the back door, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Or am I think it's more politically palatable.
Yeah, certainly true in the United States.
Yeah, because you can't argue with people need to eat, right?
Well, you can't, no, you can't. But actually, I think what you're doing in Scotland is actually, in terms of the Cash First program, you're talking about access to food is determined by access to income, and in the sense of, I mean, when I sort of hear you talking, I can just sort of see this is really the right to food in action, and actually looking at this in terms of the role of the state and the role of governments. And what really impresses me is how come the Scottish government has taken this on, you know, and I think, you know, you're right. I mean, as Jan said, I think it's the only country in the world that's actually sort of doing this specifically at the moment. I mean, there may be all kinds of other kind of examples in other more progressive societies, you know, in Europe, etc. But I think what I think really needs explaining is why Scotland doing this? Why is the UK not doing that? Why is England not doing this? Why is, you know, Wales not there? You know, Northern Ireland. I mean, you've got this devolved society, you've got this federal state, quasi-federal state. So how is the politics of all this working? I mean, there are politicians, obviously, who are supporting this. You find that sort of very difficult to see, both in the Canadian context and the provincial government context, of any politician actually really standing up and actually demanding that these kinds of policies are put forward. So what is it about Scotland? How have you got the interest of the political class to actually engage with these issues? Maybe it will all go nowhere, but I don't think so. I think, you know, there's a bill, there's a plan, there's a sort of setting this out. There's already money on the table, etc. Yeah. So what explains this?
I can provide my perspective, if that would be helpful. And I see you've got your hand up, Emily. I can come to you in a moment. I think there's a set of, like the SNP, the Scottish National Party, have been in power for as long as the Conservative Party in the UK. So they've been in power for 13, 14 years. And they came in like with a mandate or a desire to push for Scottish independence. And also they were what you would consider to be on the left of the political spectrum. So I think there's a set of unique sort of unique political situation, is that the Scottish government also tends to define itself in opposition to Westminster and what's happening at a UK level. I think the Scottish government see an opportunity here to really tackle the root causes of poverty, but maybe using the mechanism of food. I think the Scottish food and drinks industry is hugely influential in Scotland in particular, like the whiskey industry, the salmon industry, you know, like they have an outsized influence in Scotland. I also, and I think in the UK government has been consumed with Brexit, and then the sort of the sort of the pandemic and then sort of internal fighting, and their focus is completely off. Now, I do know that like certain cities like Bristol, for example, in England, got a very progressive food system and have almost done it in spite of the they've done it because there has been a lack of support. And I think probably a similar situation in London as well, that there are a lot of cities and areas that are just doing it anyway, despite there being a lack of support at a national level. So I think there's unique political circumstances which have created this situation, but it's good, it's great. I think like I'm really keen to see it in action. What does it actually mean? What does it mean for projects like myself or our project, which it does take a cash first approach, does take a dignified approach. Can we get funding to do some of our work, for example, or continue some of our work? So yeah, I think it's Scottish Government taking a particular approach and it not being a priority at a UK level. That's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Emily?
Thanks. Well, maybe my first comment was kind of along the lines of Jan, that I think it's really such a good example of like practical human rights work. I don't know if that's what I would call it in Scotland. I know when it first started, I felt like we were lifting it up more, even in communications, but I think on the international level, we're not doing enough, because this is really the only political process ongoing that's really doing right to food work right now in like a sea of regression. I think it's just reminding me also that I think we need to do a little bit more in using this example. And maybe that's a call to all of us, but also to my own organization. So we work a lot, we have in the past worked a lot with Nourish, but I just feel like there's so much going on in Scotland that even like across Europe they don't know about. And like we have all of these partners working on food, social security, and these kinds of things, but these examples are never really shared with, like, or they're not leaning on these examples. So I'll think about it a little more, but I think we should work together more, to all of us, to lift this example up. And the second question I have is, how do you see, one of the things we've been thinking a lot about is also this tension that we're seeing, and I guess Dee is also probably standing in the middle of these conversations too, between all of the questions around affordability of food and access to food for people experiencing poverty, and the tension then that is there with like small farmers and people trying to produce food who are also underpaid, not given fair market value or fair conditions. And oftentimes these like two groups are put in tension with one another, even though they tend to face the same, I guess, the same forces of oppression or exploitation. And like, how do you see some of these measures? Do you see these measures as a way of like also like a public intervention to, I don't know, deal with that? Or I don't know if my question makes sense. Or to ease that tension, or I mean, these are just questions we're having also in our own organizing and thinking work.
Well, I mean, in the UK, like that tension, like it's I would say it's like a complete kind of, they're in complete opposition. I think like if I understand correctly, as a proportion of our income, and let's say before recent inflation, that as a proportion of our income in the UK, people were spending far less money on food relative to what they spent in the 1970s and 80s. So like people spend more money on food as a proportion of their income 30 years ago than they do now. And so, the cost of food, I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody, is not the issue. but we've designed a food system in the UK that's completely dominated by huge retailers
Mhm.
who are dominated by huge retailers and almost have a monopolistic kind of capture or like sort of over the food retail industry, but operate in such fine margins because they're constantly, there's these huge retailers competing against themselves. And so the price of food is driven down. And there's a core, and people seem, I think that's a good thing, but like wages in the UK haven't risen for like 15, 20 years. So like cheap food is available because people can't earn enough to pay the right amount of for the food. So like it's almost like, yeah, we can go to the supermarket and get all this stuff for it's really, really cheap. I would much rather see a situation where people were given fair pay, farmers were given fair value for their produce, and people were earning more, but then spending more on food. You know, that's the most sort of, that's the fairest way to do it. What we've got now is that wages being driven down, so then food prices are being driven down, and it's just completely dominated by these huge retailers. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge thing that they need to unpack, and that's why my question is: do they have teeth? Does this have teeth? You know, because I actually think that it requires like an industrial strategy, like a complete kind of overhaul of farming, how we produce our food. Like huge amounts of money need to go into it. You know, we need to raise wages. We need to pay people more so that they can afford to spend more on food, and you know the whole system is fairer rather than this race to the bottom, which which up until recently has been the direction of travel. Everything has to get cheaper, but for everything to get cheaper, it means, as you say, farmers aren't getting paid. The environmental impact of the farming practices, because they're trying to do it in the cheapest way possible, it all needs to unpack. I think, like, yeah, it's a complete revolution of the food system. So having the intention to build a sustainable food system, like how is it actually going to work in practice? You know, for me, that's a huge issue. Like to give you an example, like we work with an organization who they've been trying for almost a year, maybe 2 years, to get money to fund a small pilot project to grow vegetables at a nearby farm. And I would have thought Scottish government would just go in there and just say, here you go, let's try it. This is something different. But they've been going to this funder and going back and forth and eventually got the money, but it's for like a limited period of time. And it just seems like really short term. Like you need for me, you need an industrial strategy to tackle it, rather than just good intentions and hoping the private sector figures it out. I think was that Emily? Did that answer your question, or did it give you?
Yes, no. It was just, yeah, it was a point of just like, I was just curious your thoughts. So it was great. Thanks.
Cool. Andy.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in opposition to cash first. You know, I think about, and with my American centric hat, you know, what drives the emergency food system in the US, and it's, you know, it's self-perpetuation, it's corporate interest, it's, you know, this thing around food waste and kind of getting a twofer and giving it to poor people. And then a distrust of not giving people cash because they're going to spend it on drugs or alcohol or whatever. So do those things, are those issues at all in Scotland, or what's, you know, is this just a no-brainer that's just going to sail through, or what's the pushback?
Yeah, I think there's an acceptance that cash first is not a panacea. I don't think, you know, like organizations like IFAN have been, as far as I'm aware, have been pretty clear on that it's not this silver bullet that's like, you know, but the evidence is, and certainly from my perspective, is that the sort of the primary reason why people need to access emergency food provision in the United Kingdom is lack of cash. So like if we look in, let's say 2010, 2011, so the Conservative government, the Labour government left and the Conservative government came in, and they imposed what's been referred to as austerity. So basically a shrinking of the state to balance the books, to whatever political reason. That's another conversation. And then what we saw almost immediately is this explosion of growth of food banks in response. So a large part of it was driven by a more punitive social security or welfare system, whereby people had to wait sometimes up to 6 weeks, over a month, to get their social security payment, which meant then they had no income for that period of time. So then people started to look elsewhere, had to look for food. And then that sort of came from a food bank. And then the effects of austerity and sort of continuing kind of what I would characterize as sort of deliberately complex and punitive sort of welfare system means that more and more people then have had to access food. So like access emergency food provision. So for me, like getting more people in people's pockets is absolutely the priority. Like ensuring that social security, that minimum income guarantee, which is referred to as like social security, does what it was designed to do, which is provide a floor that people can't slip through into destitution. I think that's the first dial that needs to be moved. But and to take your point, Andy, I completely agree that there are other things going on in people's lives which lead them to having to access food provision, and there are other ways that we can help people. But putting more money into people's pockets, I think will have a huge effect. I think Josh, you very kindly sort of shared that statistics of the sort of the work with the policy in the United States around child tax credit. Like, and then when that was introduced, child poverty fell through the floor, and then when it was repealed, it went back up again. So like, you know, they're kind of, it's a cruel experiment, but you know, it demonstrates if you get cash into people's pockets, then it makes a real difference. Jan?
I just wanted to say in response to what Emily was saying, that calling attention to what the Scottish government has committed to is a form of pressure on them to perform, as Dale was saying, to actually implement this. And so not only, you know, is it a beacon of hope for the rest of us, but it has the effect of upping the ante on them to make it work. So I urge you to
That's a good point, Jan. And I'm going to be there on the 1st. I'm going to be at our consultation and asking, you know, I have to kind of caveat everything that I'm saying is that, like, this is just, you know, I'm in very distinguished company just now, that people that have dedicated their lives to working in this area. I'm a relative newbie to the third sector and kind of food insecurity in general. So, you know, a lot of what I'm saying is just informed by and I do have an interest in it, but it's more like sort of my experience of working, having first set up the pantry and then just trying to kind of navigate the food systems, and hence why I was interested in the work of this group, to try and get a sort of global perspective, because obviously what's happening globally will absolutely inform what we're doing locally in Scotland, and even, you know, in Glasgow. Like, and you know, I suppose it's quite a Glasgow centric perspective, because, you know, rural, like Scotland is I think it's the least populated part of Europe. I think there's like in terms of like square mile, so like there's a lot of people living in rural areas, and that and rural food insecurity is somewhat different and experienced differently than what it is in the cities. So I just want to caveat that I wouldn't consider myself an expert. Yeah.
We all
You're
watch
doing
Shetland.
Could I just say that another thing that actually interests me about Scotland and the cash first approach, etc., and the role of the Scottish government is that the population of Scotland is about similar to the population of British Columbia, where I live, about sort of 5 million. I think that's correct. And actually just listening to you talk and setting it out so clearly and the proposals, I think you've done a really fantastic job, in terms of the information, the data, the critique, etc. It's actually kind of emboldening me, and I'm wondering, Ian and I might have a chat about how to actually get this into the hands of the British Columbian government. I mean, we have an NDP government, which is the New Democratic Party, which is left or supposed to be left, right? This is I think, because you've got sort of practical examples. I think was being talked about. Emily saying that this is human rights in practice, right? It's not just talk. It's not just saying, well, look at these legislature, look at what governments have signed on to and ratified the international covenants. It's actually this is work in progress. This is actually happening. This is a government. These are politicians who've gotten it. I think you sort of re-enlivened me actually in terms of a little bit of hope that maybe this kind of information and data and practice actually has to be shared, and there may be some possibilities in terms of politicians in our legislature who are neither right nor left, but actually progressive, who are wanting to see things happening, but the mainstream political parties are always afraid to go there because of all other competing issues, and what's this going to cost us? So I just want to thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I can,
Sorry, Ian.
If I can jump in, I mean, I think, our governments, the provincial government here in Canada is starting to recognize food as a priority. I think what I like about what you guys are doing in Scotland is that, you kind of packaged it in a good way. I mean, some of these issues like living wages, fair work, dignified food access, these are all ideas that are out there, but how do we package it within this kind of more cohesive rights-based framework is where I think we can really learn from you guys. I mean, we are seeing bigger expenditures here than we've ever seen, which is encouraging, mainly through what our ministry would call social development and poverty reduction, or poverty reduction and social development are kind of spearheading this. And we just recently saw a $200 million investment in food, which is unlike anything we've seen in the past. So just following up on Graham's comment, we do look to you guys as the gold standard to help us frame our thinking for sure. So I just want to add my appreciation to what you guys are doing as well.
Thank you very much.
In Canada, I mean, we're sort of looking at basic income. So I'm kind of trying to understand the difference between like a cash first and there's a lot of work happening around basic income. We have bills in Parliament, and we have one of our provinces is wanting to pilot a basic income provincial wide. Now with the cash first, is this mainly kind of focusing in on food specifically, like means of it, or is it more sort of universal of raising the entire income floor?
It's more of a
know much about basic income?
Yeah, so just on the last point, it's more they're trying to take a sort of a two-pronged approach with the cash first strategy. The first the first is to get people immediate access to support, right? So like that might be like emergency cash, sort of they have like Scottish Welfare Fund, which you can apply for cash and you get it immediately. And then a long-term preventative approach, which is to kind of like raise this, like, you know, make sure that everybody that's working gets a fair wage, right? So but I sort of caveat that with that the Scottish government can't do anything regarding wages, and that's a UK government, that's a reserved issue. And with regards to UBI, again, that is a reserved issue. And the UK government, I think we're going to sue a council who implemented a 4-day week. So they were like, so that gives, I think that gives you an indication of how what their approach is to to progressive policies. So obviously a 4-day week is just another way to kind of, you know, people stay on the same wages but just work less. They are, I think, again, this is a personal view, maybe ideologically opposed to things like 4-day weeks, things like UBI. I know some experiments have been done in Scotland around UBI, some in the Nordic and Scandi countries. There's some chatter about it, and I think if you speak to like Scottish ministers, like they would be kind of, I think they're broadly supportive of it, like UBI or UBS, like Universal Basic Services. But they're very limited in what levers they can pull. So, you know, there's going to be an election this year in the UK. It's very likely that there'll be a change in administration. I'm hopeful that the new administration will be more progressive, so that may change. But yeah, at the moment, there's just little pilots, Ian, taking place, which have been, the results have been positive, but in terms of implementing UBI, not possible. However, the cash first approach, you could argue, is kind of UBI by the back door. It's kind of like the minimum income guarantee, bringing everybody up to a level. It's just another way of saying kind of a UBI or a kind of UBI flavor, if that makes sense.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
Well, what is the status of the minimum income guarantee? Is it in effect, or?
I don't know. I don't know. Kaylee, do you know anything about the minimum income guarantee, like at a UK level, or is it like as a concept?
So different to so you've got like the essentials guarantee, haven't you, that like JRF and others are campaigning for, but then you've got work that JRF does around like minimum income standards. So there are lots of different sort of calculations that sort of, you know, look at what the minimum amount that, as it sounds, you know, that families need to secure the essentials for themselves and their families. I mean, but from what I know, sort of, I think anecdotally, I think it's been even quite difficult to get support sort of politically for the essentials guarantee, you know, even from the Labour Party. So I think, I mean, Dee'll know more about this than I do, but I think, yeah, I think it's been quite tricky even to sort of see support there, which is obviously in contrast to what we've been hearing about from, you know, at least the noises and the action so far from the Scottish government.
I'm just Googling it, and it looks as if the Scottish government have done some like papers on it and done some research around minimum income guarantee, but they can't do anything about it. They can't pull that. They can't. That's not within their powers to do it. It's a reserved matter, and I would think that any research in England and the UK government minimum income guarantee is non-existent. So yeah, they've done some work on it to try and calculate, as Kaylee says, like what level would be required, but until we get our independence, until Scotland becomes independent, then it won't happen.
Right. So it's not among the devolved
No.
power. That's
We
interesting.
we have the control over some welfare and social security payments, but the vast majority, let's say 60–70%, is controlled by the UK government, and we have 30%. It's slowly inching up, but the big ones are still controlled by the Department of Work and Pensions, or DWP, in London.
Okay. Well, here's to Scottish independence.
I have no view on that, Jan. As a charity, we were completely politically neutral. But then it's an interesting point because, like, again, like as this, politically, and that's why I'm like, let's see if this stuff has teeth, because you can kind of throw it out there and say, if we were independent, we will do this, but you don't actually need to prove it, right? It's like almost like a counterfactual, like if we were independent, we would do this. I would be curious as, paradoxically, there was a referendum in 2014 where the Scottish people said no, but it actually strengthened the Scottish National Party.
Mm-hmm.
So it strengthened their position because they had an opposition.
And I mean, Dale, it seems like, yeah, thanks so much. Really, really great for you to hear from you, sort of laying it out really clearly for us all. And I think, what's coming through for me is that actually, there is maybe something, even as a group, thinking about how we can sort of further, highlight and show the example of what the Scottish government are doing. But I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective as somebody sort of, working on the front line, like what is useful, I think, what's useful for you, for our group to be able to do, or I'm just thinking of Emily and Josh, I'm just thinking if we're, organising a GSA get together later this year, is it, having the example of Scotland and what's going on there, and like potentially inviting Dale to speak, I'm just sort of thinking how we can do that. So yeah, just for you don't have to answer it now as well, Dale, but just to think about how we can be useful as a group, because I think that's something we've been always had in our mind as we've been been going, is how we can sort of help advocate for, obviously, for right to food.
Yeah, I would just ask you to be curious about, like, I suppose, like, do what you're going to do off the back of this conversation, which it seems like do a bit of more research and kind of take what Scotland is doing to your representatives or to your groups and talk a little bit more about it. Like, I think I'm just really grateful to be given the opportunity to speak. As I say, I would like to claim all the credit for the work the Scottish government are doing and all the pressure groups, but the reality is that I've done very little. We're in this position due to the blood, sweat, and tears of small groups, organisations, politicians at local, national level, putting the hard yards in. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I was slightly cynical about whether some of these things would be actually work in practice, which you're probably getting from what when I'm talking, but I've kind of got a different perspective on it now, because I'm now really grateful that we've got these foundations, these building blocks in place to work from, and that's something, yeah, that we should be proud of. But I'm hopeful that these strategies and the cash first approach bears some fruit and really, really helps people, because I see people at the pantry every single day that literally have nothing, have no money, nothing, and are in various states of distress or crisis. And I wish there was something I could do, so I hope that all of these things will provide that safety net for people, so that nobody is in crisis anymore, or nobody has an empty stomach. So yeah, just be curious and be interested, and yeah, if you think it'd be worthwhile me participating again, then let me know. I certainly would like to come to the next meeting and kind of retain an interest and find out what's going on around the globe.
Brilliant. And yeah, thanks so much, Dale, and thanks for your time, for coming and sharing with us all. And